What's up, Kirk students? It's Sean. Just wanted to do another quick follow-up after a great Bible study last night. We looked at Acts chapter 6, verses 8 through 15, and one of the skills that I want to teach you as a result of last night was how to make a list. Now, the reason that we're going to do that is because this is one of those sections of Scripture that is a pretty easy narrative. There's nothing really hidden, nothing that if you read it again and again jumps out off the page. And that's one of the things that we talked about when I said, what is one of the hardest things about doing this type of study when you read something for 10 minutes over and over and over again and nothing seems to grab you? The main question was, what do we look for? So I want to teach you that when you study this way, if you don't know what to look for, if you don't know what you're looking for or at, one of the easiest things to help you is to make a list. So, how do you do that? Well, the first thing you want to do is you want to just look for a proper name, a name of a person, a name of a place, whatever. So, in this passage in particular, what we see first of all is we see that it says, now Stephen. Stephen was a man full of grace. Okay, so we're going to make this list about Stephen. Now, as you read along in the passage, anytime you see the name Stephen or a pronoun like he or him or whatever, you want to highlight that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and go on through the passage and show you what that looks like. Now, Stephen, a man full of God's grace and power, performed great wonders and signs among the people. Opposition arose from members of the synagogue of the freedmen, Jews of all these places, who began to argue with Stephen. Let's highlight his name again. But they could not stand up against the wisdom that the Spirit gave him. That's talking about Stephen. Then they secretly persuaded some men to say all this stuff. We've heard Stephen speak words against Moses and against God. So they stirred up the people and the elders and the teachers of the law. They seized Stephen and brought him before the Sanhedrin. They produced false witnesses who testified, this fellow, that's talking about Stephen, never stopped speaking against the holy place and against the law. For we have heard him, that's Stephen, say that this Jesus of Nazareth will destroy this place and change the customs Moses handed down to us. All who were sitting in the Sanhedrin looked intently at Stephen, highlight it, and they saw that his face, Stephen's, was like the face of an angel. So now that we have all these places with Stephen marked, then we start to look around it to see what we learn about Stephen. So in this first place, we see that Stephen was, number one, he was a man. And then it says he was full of God's grace. He was full of God's power. He performed great wonders and signs among the people. All right, so this is the first part of our list about Stephen. Now let's move on. The next place we see it is these Jews from the synagogue of the freedmen began to argue with Stephen. So as you're making your lists, you want to highlight everything. Even if you think it might not be relevant, you still want to add it. So the fact that Stephen was arguing with these guys could be significant later. You just don't know at this point. But if you keep going, the next one it says the Spirit gave him. What did the Spirit give him? Well, he gave him wisdom. And it is that wisdom that these guys could not stand up against. So that might have been kind of fast, but you notice what I'm doing here. Whenever you're observing the text, you always want to try and answer who, what, when, where, why, or how questions. Okay, so when I see that, okay, the Spirit gave him something, you ask the question, what? What did the Spirit give him? You highlight the word wisdom. That's your answer for that. All right, so let's move on. They secretly persuaded men to say, we've heard Stephen speak blasphemous words. That's not anything we learn about Stephen. That's actually something we learn about the synagogue of the freedmen, so we can skip that one. They seized Stephen and they brought him before the Sanhedrin. This is important, okay, because this answers the where question. They brought him before the Sanhedrin. That's where we find Stephen in this story. And then it says, this fellow, talking about Stephen, never stopped speaking against this holy place and against the law. Now, what's significant here, you can put that in your list. He never stopped speaking. That's the gospel message. That's awesome for him that he's constantly speaking about that. But we're just making our list right now. We've heard him say that this Jesus of Nazareth will destroy this place and change the customs. And then all who were sitting in the Sanhedrin looked intently at Stephen, and they saw that his face was like the face of an angel. So we want to add that to our list. So now that we have a list, we go back and we start to see what we learn about Stephen, the things that we can explore further. Because if you just read it, it's a great story, it's easy to understand. But if you start to make a list about a person or a place, then it gives you material that you can start to explore further, okay? So as we're doing our study, we start to see things like, okay, Stephen was a man. What does that mean? How old was he? What does man mean? We need to look that up and see if there's an age thing that might lend itself to the story. When it says that Stephen was full of God's grace and full of God's power, what does this word full mean? So that's a word study that you can do, and that might help you understand what that means to be full of God's grace. Was he just a good guy? Was he a gifted teacher? What? There might be something there. When he performed great wonders and signs, then you start to think, okay, were there other people in Acts that have done this? Are there other stories in this chapter or in this first couple of chapters that we've studied where people are doing great signs and wonders? Because I thought that Stephen was selected just to distribute food to Hellenistic Jewish widows, but now it's saying that he's doing some language that I've heard before that the apostles have done. So that helps you as you want to explore this further. People argued with Stephen, so we know that he got in situations that weren't always pleasant. Maybe you could explore that further, learn more about Stephen. He was filled with wisdom. He went before the Sanhedrin. He never stopped speaking. And then his face was like the face of an angel. This is all part of our list. So as you're doing your study and you do this kind of discipline, you put this kind of tool in your repertoire where you start to make lists about people or places, you really can start to learn a lot more about who the Bible is talking about, what the Bible's talking about. You can learn about God's calling on people's lives. You can see things that become applicable to you that you might have missed if you just read through and move on because it's too, quote unquote, easy to understand. So just as a reminder, the reason that we study this way is because we want you guys to graduate high school knowing how to feed yourself. And we want to give you the skills that you can use to help you do that. And something as simple as making a list about a proper noun can really open up the meaning of the text for you in a way that you might have missed. So again, I just want to say I love you guys. Thanks so much for connecting with Bible study week in and week out. And thanks for checking out this video. And I just want to remind you that if you ever want to share this video or share anything else that we do as a ministry, make sure that you use the hashtag kirkstudents on whatever social network you're using. That way anybody can find us anywhere. We love you, and we'll be praying for you. Peace.